My personal belief is that switching your rifle into your off shoulder is both a very basic fundamental skill that you should know and be confident in executing, and that could also be the difference between life or death. There are many videos of Ukraine soldiers inside of the trench or otherwise switching their rifle into their off shoulder.
Бійниця, справа, зліва.
Зліва бійниця. Плюс. Я тримаю ліво. Давай.
Хай туди далі, вогонь по нас. Убил, блядь, убил!
Хорош. Выходите, блядь!
Хух, ебать.
Контроль. Все, нету, блядь.
А?
Нету, походу.
Що нету?
Пидоров.
Що нету?
Заебашил?
Заїбашив, живой був. Стрільни.
Чисто.
Чисто?
Да.
Все, це кай...
And also Israeli soldiers doing the same thing.
תחצה ראשון. יא, סע.
And the reason why you may do that is to minimize your exposure to a threat area. There is a time and place where it makes sense and a time and place where it does not make sense, and I'll go over all of those. But first, we want to consider how we have our rifle set up and where we wear our sling. So in order to actually complete this task, you have to probably wear your sling in a way that is more conducive to a CQB environment, and that may be putting the sling around your neck, or if you have a one-point sling, you really don't have this problem, or simply loosening your sling enough so that you can actually move it over into your shoulder. There's different ways that you can attach your sling onto your rifle and be confident that you're going to execute that task unimpeded. For me, I like to have my sling attached to my buttstock on the opposite side, on the outside, because that allows me to switch the rifle over without impeding the sling against or getting the sling caught in my buttstock itself. Once you figure out where you have your sling and that you can do that without your sling getting in the way, you then have to kind of figure out what your process is for moving your rifle into your off shoulder. There's a couple different ways to do this that I know is taught. For me, I've simplified it down to remembering one thing instead of having to remember a number of different steps. As long as you are confident in the way that you do it and you drill it and rep it, then it's not an issue. But what I have found is simply reminding myself to push my rifle into my support hand and grab my magazine. And then from there, you're simply moving the rifle over, re-gripping the rifle, and then going back the other direction. Doesn't really matter how you do it, but the entire purpose of doing it is that you're getting that done quickly, because in the situations where you may switch your rifle into your off shoulder, you probably have a lot more time than you think you have, but we want to do things as quickly and as efficiently as we can. Another way that you could switch your rifle into your off shoulder is simply by keeping your hands exactly where they are, putting the buttstock in your shoulder and looking through your optic with your non-dominant eye. Some people prefer to do it that way. I can't do it that way when I have a plate carrier on and a helmet on. It's just too cumbersome for me to do that, and so I don't even train that way when I don't have that equipment on, because I want to keep things the same whether I have the equipment on or I don't. Both of those ways of doing it are viable options. Whichever works for you is totally fine. I'll play a clip from my previous channel where I used real combat footage from Israel to explain why it's probably a good idea in certain situations to transition your rifle from your strong side into your weak side. I've talked about switching shoulders in some of my previous videos as a concept and idea that may work in certain situations, and that being because it allows you to be in an angle of attack sooner relative to your angle of exposure to a threat in certain situations. But the point is that the bad guy got off a round, and that round just happened to not hit the soldier in this situation. I believe that based on where the soldier is standing, where his muzzle is pointing, and the lack of a reaction from the suspect or the bad guy after this first round is fired, that he didn't actually hit him, nor was his muzzle actually in a position to actually hit the bad guy in this situation. Had he changed the rifle into his off shoulder, he could have been in an angle of attack slightly sooner and minimized his exposure while doing that. In policing or in combat, there could be situations, and often there are situations, where we need to observe from a particular location behind a piece of cover into an area where the threat could be, meaning we don't know exactly where the threat is, but we want to be able to observe from where we are, we want to be able to minimize exposure, and we also want to be able to engage the threat if necessary. So if I am using this corner, if this is a wall of a building or whatever the case may be, if I maintain my rifle in my strong side, but I want to minimize my exposure this direction, the only way that I could possibly engage at the greatest angle possible relative to my exposure is if I simply overexpose myself so that I can engage on that same angle. But if I switch my rifle into my off shoulder, I can both minimize my exposure and observe and also engage if necessary. It will never make sense for you to switch your rifle into your off shoulder if you're already moving quickly. So maybe if we're moving direct to threat, or even in a CQB environment where we're already moving quickly, we're already overexposing ourselves right then and there. Therefore, we are not minimizing our exposure, and that is not a consideration that we need to have. So if I'm moving quickly around this corner with my rifle in my strong side, I'm already exposing myself. I'm not gaining anything, and in fact, I wouldn't argue that on the move that quickly, switching our rifle into our off shoulder, we're making it more difficult on us because we don't actually train that often, especially moving, with our rifle in our off shoulder. So in my off shoulder, moving quickly, I'm already exposing myself, therefore it does not make sense to do that in that situation. When does it make sense? When I'm static or slowly trying to pie a specific area to minimize my exposure, to be able to observe where the threat might be, and also engage the threat if that's something that I have to do. One of the things that people bring up as a reason why you should not switch your rifle into your off shoulder is because people don't train on their offside, which you should train on your offside, but people aren't as accurate or as good on their weak side as they are their strong side. And that's probably true. However, the instances where we're probably engaging in this way, pieing a threshold, we're looking at 10 to 15 feet probably of an engagement distance, right? Or even if we're in a school holding down a hallway, we're doing this from a static position, or a position where we're not, at least not moving quickly. Maybe we're slowly pieing. And everybody should be capable of engaging in their off shoulder from those types of distances and from those circumstances. In instances where we're slowly pieing and trying to observe something that we can't see and we don't know where the threat is in that moment, I would prefer to minimize my exposure rather than be in an angle of exposure relative to the suspect's angle of attack and not be able to actually engage him because my muzzle can't actually engage where the suspect is, but the suspect can engage me.